Well, at least when the Kraken lose in overtime, they still get a point in the standings for it. And it's looking like it's a good thing we have them this year because it could be a long year for the Hawks. What's cracking, everybody? And yes, we are back with some more Kraken R&R. Now, I know this one's a couple days late, but we're talking about that 2-1 loss against the Columbus Blue Jackets in overtime. So, yep, for the third time in a row and 3 out of 3 games in the franchise's history, it's another 1-goal game. But before we get to the game itself, there's something I have to get off my chest and maybe go on a little bit of a rant about. So, if you are just here for the game recap, then you can probably skip ahead a little bit. Okay, so the reason that this R&R is coming to you a day or two late is because we tried to get out to Columbus to see this game live, but took a wrong turn somewhere, ended up getting lost, and ended up spending our weekend in Ocean Shores, Oregon. Okay, that's not exactly how it happened, but either way, we did spend our weekend in the northwest corner of Oregon State. And that's important because when it comes to what I need to go on a little bit of a rant about, we were basically just right across the border from Washington State, and even though we did have Root Sports access and Root Sports spent all day talking about the Kraken game coming up at 4 p.m. local time, when it came to 4 p.m., instead they were playing a rerun of Eastern Washington playing, to be completely honest with you, I don't even know who it was, because this is, I guess, technically D1 football, but hardly at best. So just to reiterate, even though we were just about 4 hours south of Seattle, maybe even a little bit less, and had access through cable to Root Sports Northwest, who carries the Kraken, we couldn't watch the Kraken game live, and instead we're stuck with a crappy football game that didn't even have any local ties whatsoever. Now, fortunately for me, I did come with a backup plan and had another way to watch the Kraken game live, and sure, you could also point out that even down there, again, not that far from Seattle, so it shouldn't have been a problem in the first place, but even there, they were going to play a rerun of the Kraken game starting at 8. So if you really wanted to watch the Kraken and didn't have any other way to do it, I guess you could just ignore the internet for 4 hours and watch it after the fact. But even still, it drove home a point for me that I've seen people complaining about across social media that are in the Northwest region that should have access to Kraken games, even people within the state of Washington that have cable and should be able to watch the games, but Root Sports just doesn't broadcast the game in their area. Now, I don't know if this was always part of the plan when the Kraken signed on with Root Sports as their TV partner, but if it was, it really seems like this was even worse of a decision than we thought at the time. Because, while sure, you can have plenty of access to the Kraken via cable if you're in the immediate Seattle area, they're not doing themselves any favor as far as growing the game or growing the reach of the Kraken fan base beyond Western Washington. In fact, I'd say it's even worse than that. I imagine that they're actually driving a number of people that were excited about this team away because, one, even if you have cable and are in the Root Sports Northwest region, you're clearly not by any means guaranteed to be able to watch Kraken games live. And even if you don't have cable and want to go the streaming option route and are in one of those areas, well, you are still going to get blacked out for being in the local area. Now, I could maybe see an argument for like Montana or Northern California maybe not being a local sports cable region for a Seattle area team, as even though those areas don't have teams of their own, it's still not that close to Seattle. But again, we're talking about Northwest Oregon. I mean, this is closer to Seattle than Portland is, so this would basically be like if the Portland Trailblazers weren't available on live TV through Root in Seattle, which is relevant because the Trailblazers got picked up by Root Sports in the offseason as well. And while I'm not a huge NBA fan, again, largely because the Sonics left Seattle, I don't actually know if you can watch Trailblazers games live in Seattle. I would imagine you probably could, and certainly should be able to watch Kraken games live in Portland. But that aside, we'll get to the game, which started out for pretty much the entirety of the first period being a pretty back and forth game without either team gaining massive chunks of clear momentum. There were definitely chances on both sides, and I would say that Seattle had the better of the period when it came to possession and spending more time in the offensive zone shooting at Columbus's net than Columbus had the puck in Seattle's defensive zone. But even still, Columbus did have a few better scoring chances and had more shots by the end of the period, so I think you could make an argument for either team having played better by the end of the first period. I mean, at the very least, we certainly did get to see pretty early on that this was going to be a low-scoring game, and definitely a battle between the two goaltenders, as Grubauer in particular looked very strong early on and had to make a couple of pretty big saves. I would say that Appleton definitely seemed to stand out defensively and had a couple of pretty good plays to either take the puck away or make sure that what could have turned into a breakaway didn't. And Tanev also had a couple of pretty sizable hits and continued his physical play early on in the season, but either way, we ended up going into the first intermission scoreless for the first time in 3 games for the Kraken. But things definitely did get a little bit more eventful in the second period, even right out of the gate, as pretty much right at the start of the period, the Kraken ended up going on the power play off of a cross-check, which I think would have been a pretty borderline call in previous seasons, so this is one that you could probably chalk up to that more strict enforcement on the cross-checking rule that they're going with this season. Or at least early on. We'll see how long it actually ends up lasting, but either way, it was an early power play for the Kraken, and they got a couple of big chances during the course of it. The best chance, or chances of which, coming off of a rebound from a save by Merzlikins that a couple of Kraken had a chance at a bouncing puck basically in front of an empty net. The better chance definitely being that of Ryan Donato, who ends up fanning on the bouncing puck as it jumps over his stick as he tries to shovel it into the goal, and the Blue Jackets escape the power play, still with the game tied 0-0. And pretty soon after the power play ended, Columbus got an odd man break and a pretty good chance on Grubauer, who made another strong save, as he definitely picked up in this game where he left off in that third period of the Nashville game. And then just a few minutes later, after the Kraken had kind of regained control a little bit, once again, a big rebound finds Laine wide open for a breakaway, as it's pretty much him versus Grubauer, and he tries to put it past Grubauer with a backhand, but Grubauer gets his toe on it. Unfortunately, the rebound goes right back to Laine, who finds a guy in front of the net, shoots it on again, what should have been a pretty easy goal, but Grubauer makes a spectacular save, diving back to keep the game tied at 0. Fortunately for Grubauer and the Kraken, the next high-danger scoring chance would come for Seattle on Columbus's net, and this one, from start to finish, was a thing of beauty, as Tanev, with a strong defensive stick, steals the puck from a Columbus defenseman on the offensive blue line and gets pretty much out by himself in the offensive zone towards the key, and looks to be trying to pass the puck to somebody coming into the zone for Seattle, but doesn't see anybody as he's slowly drifting towards the net, and just as a couple of the Blue Jackets kind of collide on him and are looking like they're going to be able to make a defensive play, he decides to do it himself, stick handles a couple of times and gets it to his backhand and shovels it over the leg of Merzlikins and into the top of the net to make it 1-0 Kraken. And once again, oh baby, was this a beautiful goal that had a lot of people, maybe outside of Pittsburgh, but I think even some Penguins fans wondering just where that came from as far as skill from Tanev was concerned. Either way though, that's now 3 for him in the first 3 games for the Kraken, as he is now the leading goal scorer in franchise history. Which, again, I'm pretty sure everyone saw coming. Now, it is fair to point out that he probably will fall off a little bit when it comes to goal scoring. I don't know that he can keep up an 82 goal pace, but that is the pace he's on. Plus, he's also shooting currently 50%, which is, we'll say, safely above what the NHL average typically is, or even what the top end of the NHL typically is. So maybe we'll see that come down to earth, but for now, it's a lot of fun. Unfortunately, however, even though we go to the break in the third period with the Kraken maintaining that 1-goal lead, the rest of this game would not turn out to be a whole lot of fun for Seattle fans, as even though it was not nearly as bad as that Nashville game, Seattle once again comes out in the third period with that 1-goal lead, clearly with a defensive first mindset and playing much more not to lose than to win the game. Now, I know it's just 2 games that it's happened in and only the 3rd game of the season, and for the Kraken, only the 3rd game in the history of the franchise, so it's too early to freak out too much, but this is really not what we'd like to see the Kraken doing as far as their game plan with a 1-goal lead starting the 3rd period. Now, I can kind of get it if it's a 2 or especially 3 goal lead. The strength of this team is supposed to be the defense, so sure, if you want to play it safe with a multiple goal lead, then I guess you can see that happening until maybe they get within a goal, but the Kraken had, again, for the most part, kind of been controlling the majority of the 5-on-5 play, again with a couple of breakouts here and there, but at least had possession of the puck for the majority of the time with that aggressive forechecking style that they've played pretty much anytime they don't have the lead. But as soon as they have that lead in the third period, they are fully on their heels, and even though they did spend much more time in the offensive zone, even within the first few minutes of this third period than they did in the entirety of the Nashville third period, it was still pretty clear that the entirety of the momentum of this game had basically just been served on a silver platter to Columbus. And while Grubauer is an excellent goaltender and proved that throughout the course of this game, basically putting it on him every third period to not lose the game is just not fair. And just in case you think I'm overly exaggerating this defensive first mentality that the Kraken seem to have with a third period lead, I would point you to the Corsi, or basically possession graph, ever since the Kraken got that 1 goal lead, as pretty much, as you can see, the game's pretty back and forth throughout, really up until that first goal by Tanev, and then pretty much immediately after that first goal, even to end the second period, momentum immediately goes to the Columbus side, and they have the vast advantage as far as possession is concerned, pretty much right up until they do unfortunately end up tying it and getting one past Grubauer, which, again, the way the Kraken were playing this period was basically bound to happen at some point. And then, even though it is pretty much exactly what we would have liked to be seeing from the start of the third period, it's almost equally as frustrating to see a switch basically get flipped right back in the other direction as soon as that equalizing goal goes in, and the Kraken go back on that aggressive, forechecking, possession priority type of playstyle that they had been playing up until that Tanev goal. And again, this shows up in the graph. As you can see, the Kraken do take a second to get momentum turned back in their favor, as Columbus isn't quite as ready to just hand it over to Seattle as Seattle was able to hand it to them. But they do, again, take control of this game to end the third period, but can't get that lead going into the first overtime in franchise history. And even if we weren't necessarily super excited or thrilled about how we ended up getting there, I think a lot of us Kraken fans were excited and ready to watch this first 3-on-3 overtime in franchise history, especially considering it came against a team like Columbus and not one like the Oilers, for example, where, yeah, that's not going to be an exciting overtime for anybody to be playing. And again, for you newer fans, in the regular season, the NHL does play 3-on-3 overtime, so that's why things did look considerably different, a lot faster paced, and a lot more open ice. Not to mention that the period was only 5 minutes long, as the NHL regular season overtime is. If it ends up tied by the end of that, you end up going to the shootout like the Canucks did for their first 2 games, and it's decided there. So yes, again, that whole 3-on-3 thing is just how overtime works in the regular season in the NHL, so anytime we go to overtime, that's what it's going to look like. And unfortunately for the Kraken, even though, again, not to sound like a broken record, the Kraken are likely to be playing a lot of close games the way the team is built, and based on how they've played in third period so far, probably going to be playing their fair share of overtimes. This is not a team that wants to be going to overtime all that frequently. And put simply, that's pretty much just because most teams in the NHL, even one that isn't necessarily super strong top to bottom on the forward end like Columbus, still have 1 or 2 goal scorers on their team that are better than pretty much anybody Seattle has on their roster outside of maybe Yanni Gourde. But in Columbus's case, they still have Patrick Laine, who is absolutely hands down a better goal scorer than anybody Seattle has. And while you can deal with that defensively, especially being a strong defensive team, when it comes to 5-on-5 play throughout the course of a game where there's a lot more line changes and all that going on, and Laine doesn't spend as much time on the ice, when it comes to 3-on-3 play and he has a lot more ice to work with and a lot more time that he's going to be spending on the ice during that period, it's gonna be harder for the Kraken to figure out how to shut down those elite goal scorers. And for Columbus specifically, they also have Max Domi, who some of you may also remember as being one of the players the Kraken passed on during the expansion draft. Yeah, great. Now, sure, based on what we knew at the time of the expansion draft, it's fair to say that Ron Francis might be a little bit surprised to see Domi healthy and playing at the start of the season because, well, let's just say that wasn't the expectation coming into the season at the time of the draft, but either way, we'll remember that the Kraken ended up taking Gavin Bayreuther from Columbus, who was a UFA. The Kraken decided not to sign, ends up signing back in Columbus as an unrestricted free agent, and then Columbus ends up waiving him during the preseason. He clears waivers and now is playing for their AHL team. Or at least I assume he's playing for their AHL team. I don't actually know where he's playing. The point is, the Kraken basically passed up on Domi so that they could take no one. Now, I know, the expansion draft was a while ago and it's time to move on. This team has looked pretty good through 3 games and they certainly look like they can be competitive in the division, so does it really end up making that big of a difference? I guess we'll never know, but probably not a huge difference. And does it end up making a difference as far as this game is concerned? Well, I definitely think you could argue that it didn't make a huge difference, even with Domi in the lineup. But even though the game-winning goal for Columbus in overtime, which obviously, yes, Columbus ends up winning, we talked about that at the beginning of the video, so it shouldn't be a surprise by now, but yes, Columbus ends up winning in sudden death overtime 2-1, and it comes on a Patrick Laine shot. Of course, it's going to be Laine. And unfortunately, it also comes on what turned out to be a second odd man rush for Columbus, even though Grubauer shut down the first one in overtime. This one because Geekie took a, let's just say, unfortunate and maybe ill-advised line change, leaving the Kraken 2-on-3 with Laine having the puck coming into the offensive zone. And they went with trying to take the pass away from Laine, where this is one of a few players in the NHL that I think you probably want to give him the pass and take away the shot, as he's definitely not the guy you want shooting the puck with open ice in overtime. And he demonstrated that here. So even though Max Domi does get one of the assists on the game-winning goal in overtime, it's pretty much all Laine on that one. Still though, through 3 games, which it's worth mentioning are 3 road games to start out the first season, and 2 of those coming in 2 of the harder places to play, and the third one coming in a place that has a cannon inside of their building, there are definitely some signs that this is still a very competitive team and is going to be playing fun games to watch throughout the course of this season. The power play has still been a pleasant surprise through all 3 of these games and should have had another goal in this one, just that kind of happens with the bouncing puck in front of the net. Those don't always go in, even though they really should more often than not. And also that aggressive forechecking style that has them controlling possession of the puck much more frequently than I think we were expecting them to early on in the season is definitely an upside when they use it, which again is pretty much the one big complaint, is that we'd like to see them continue to play that style with a lead, especially in the third period, but again, we'll just have to see where things go, and especially how things go in this back-to-back coming up tonight, which is Monday night, and then again Tuesday night against the Devils. With that, we have reached the end of this one, as the game against the Flyers is just about to start, so I'll be editing this one while watching that game. If you have made it to this point, as always, thank you very much for watching. If you did like or enjoy this video, there are buttons for that kind of stuff down below. And until next time, which will be pretty soon here, stay safe out there, be good to each other, and go Kraken.